Today I'm going to walk you through a few items in Chapter 1 that I want you to give particular attention to as you're reading. This is more of a guide for your reading as you move through and take notes on the chapter. These four focus questions are where we're going to begin with the chapter, and I want you to think about these four questions and how they relate to the chapter and where you can find these answers. So if you want to talk with a classmate, if you want to just read through on your own, but I want you to take note of these four. So how do children learn? I want you to think specifically about the language arts when we think about this. Also, how does language and culture influence learning? So this can be really important in how we see things. I want you to think about schema here. What are the language arts? So what comprises the language arts? And then how do children learn language arts? So what are the basic steps or building blocks that happen when our students begin to learn in the language arts? We have some different terms to look at that are the process of learning. So some of these are connected with schema. And remember, schema is our mental model of how we see the world, how we work on things, and how we're able to understand different activities and things we read. And so these four terms, I want you to take a few moments and look through your chapter and find these terms and see how they relate to learning. Now, remember that as you look through and you find these terms, I want you to think about how they impact learning. How do they relate to learning? Here are a couple of instances that help us understand how learning can connect to those terms. One theory that you want to keep in mind this semester and take note of is the ZPD, the Zone of Proximal Development. This is by Vygotsky, and I know we've talked about it in previous courses, but take a moment and look up ZPD and see how that works. It's very connected to scaffolding in that the zone of proximal development is in that range of where the student can perform the task, but is going to need the teacher's guidance to do it. So this is where guided instruction comes in. So students are able to do the task without severe frustration, but they still do need the teacher to help guide through the activity or the learning of the skill. Now, when we scaffold, this means that we as teachers provide building blocks in order to support the learning. So the student doesn't have every skill in place or doesn't have every piece of understanding in place to do the activity. And so we're providing a bit of scaffolding throughout to help them achieve some level of success. These are the different areas of the language arts. This is what comprises the language arts and what we teach. What you'll find is that when you look at state standards, you're going to find these aspects are related to language arts. Some state standards are actually broken into these actual categories. These are our four language systems. Take a few minutes. Go find these in your chapter, make a few notes about these different language systems, talk them through with a classmate. You might want to create a chart in your notes so that you can go back to it and refer to what these systems are. Now, as we go forward, we're going to talk a lot about skills and strategies. Keep in mind that when we say skills and strategies, that does not mean the two are synonymous with one another. The two do not mean the same thing, okay? Skills are used automatically. We build those skills. We learn how to use those skills. Strategies are problem-solving mechanisms that help us work through thinking processes. So those are two different aspects of learning. And as we start to talk about our lessons and our lesson plans, we're going to have a lot of discussion about, is this a skill or is this a strategy? Here are some learning strategies that we typically have in language arts. Take a moment, make note in your notes and in your chapter for these 4 learning strategies. You're going to see these time and again. You're going to be using these in your lesson plans this semester. Critical literacy is talked about in your chapter, and what happens in critical literacy is this is a way for language to become a means for social action, and it's the empowering role of language. And so this is when we use language to be able to solve problems, persuade, communicate in an effective way. And it helps us our students interact about language in the classroom. So take a few moments, make some notes about critical literacy in your chapter. We will also talk about English learners, English language learners. And so keep in mind that you want to, as we talk about teaching writing, as we talk about incorporating reading into our learning, our language learners in our classrooms have got to interact with each other, have got to interact with us. That's difficult, but it has to happen. We learn through interaction. Also, our language learners develop 2 types of English proficiency. They have a social language and they have an academic language. This is broken down into BICS and CALPS, BICS and CALPS. So BICS is our basic interpersonal communication system. That is the basics of, hello, how are you? How do I find the bathroom? These are just the general operating in society types of language. We learn this first, and it's our basic thing. Our students can become very proficient in this and fool us and make us think they are very fluent, but they may not have a full grasp on CALPS. CALPS is our academic language proficiency and skills. So a lot of times when we start to talk about specific academic language, that is CALPS. And if they have not fully developed that academic language, then they are not aware of what is going on. So we would need to have some support structure in place for them, some scaffolding, in order to bring them into the zone of proximal development. If they don't have the academic language, they're too frustrated to even move into that zone of proximal development where we can help guide them.